Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us on this webinar this evening. Just a few housekeeping rules to get us going before I introduce our speaker for tonight. All the attendees are muted and your videos are all turned off as well. If you have any questions or comments that you would like to put to our speaker tonight, at the bottom of your screens on the right-hand side, you'll see a chat function or a Q&A function, so you can submit your questions and comments in there. And we'll have a bit of a Q&A session after Alistair's presentation. And we will also be recording tonight's webinar as well. So if you have to jump out or if you want to catch up with it after the webinar, we'll be putting it onto our YouTube channel. And I'll be sending you that out now and email it with it as well. So we are joined tonight by Alistair Yeomans, and he is the acting manager for the Plant Healthy Certification Scheme. So he'll be discussing tonight with us plant biosecurity and the Plant Healthy Certification Scheme that is being run. So Alistair has a Bachelor of Science in Horticulture and a Master's of Science in Forestry. And he comes with us tonight with a wealth of experience across ornamental nurseries and in gardens as well. And he is also the coordinator of HTA's tree and hedging group as well. So Alistair will give you a bit more of an introduction to who he is as he's going along in this presentation. We're also joined tonight by Graham Cross as well as Plant Health. If there's any questions or comments that you want to pose to him as well, he'd be happy to answer them tonight or get back to you on a later date as well. So I'll pass you over to Alistair now and he'll begin his presentation and enjoy the talk. We'll have a bit of a Q&A session afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Connor. I'll just try and share my screen, see how we get on. Can I just check that everyone can see that first slide okay?
Yep, that looks great.
That's grand. Connor, thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, my name is Alistair Yeomans, and I'm a chartered forester and a chartered horticulturalist. So I've got sort of a foot in both camps in terms of the forestry and horticulture side, which the relevance will become apparent as we sort of go through the presentation this evening. So a bit of background. I did my undergraduate at Strathclyde University in Glasgow. I actually did a 6 months post in at University College Dublin. I just found out that I was in the same agricultural building as Connor, so that was nice to reminisce about that. But my final project was on Botrytis cinerea, so the sort of more traditional side of plant health. I then went and worked at the Under Arboretum in America, and that's when I really started to get the notion of plant biosecurity, because whilst I was there, the woolly adelgid arrived on the eastern hemlock tree. So that was an actual introduction onto a site, and started to get an idea of what a new pest could do when introduced into a new area. In terms of sort of crop production, I spent some time in Portugal. Again, I not on my site, but the main site, they accidentally introduced a bacterial pathogen onto rocket, and that came in on machinery. So again, that was another example of a introduced pest. It was very costly, it turned out. I then came back to the UK, did some I managed a rhododendron nursery for a year. That was about 2000. And then after that, probably 2006, 2007, a more sort of general amenity horticultural nursery in Oxfordshire. And I refer to those two dates because in between those two dates, a fairly worrying pathogen got introduced, which was Phytophthora ramorum, and really that's the relationship between horticulture and forestry that I'll come on to. So as a forester, I became really aware of plant pests and diseases in 2011. I mean, I had a fair idea that there were the various introductions, but what really sort of hit the headlines in England was the introduction of ash dieback that came in about 2011. And just about that time, an independent panel on forestry reported, but it was an independent panel that was convened following the aborted sell-off of the public forest estate by the Conservative government back in 2010. And they were basically asked to do a full review of woodland management and forestry in the UK. And one of the things that they picked up upon was the introduction of over 20 new tree pests in pretty much as many years. And it started with the obvious candidate that probably most of us know about, which was Dutch elm disease. And of course, one of the things that the pests and diseases, it's not very well, these sort of pests and diseases coming into the country, but they obviously cause a considerable amount of damage as well. And a paper came out published by Oxford University, the Woodland Trust and Silver Foundation that did an assessment of the social, economic and environmental cost of ash dieback, and that was estimated at 14.8 billion pounds worth of damage over a 100-year period. So, you know, these pests and diseases, they really do have a big impact. They might sort of sneak in, whether it be on pallet wood or on plants, but once they really manifest themselves in an ecosystem, they can be really quite damaging. Now, you know, we're about a month after COP22, and there's been this tremendous appetite for planting trees. And to use an Americanism, I sort of was scratching my head because there's a sort of split screen situation going on. On the right-hand side, there was, as I say, a great appetite for planting trees. And that was typified by a Country File episode where they've set up this big tree planting project. It's trees and plants, actually. Whereas at the same time, there was an article in The Economist on October the 9th, which basically had a rather worrying headline and questionable term called a tree-demic. Now, whether the tree-demic means that everyone wants to plant lots and lots of trees, or a tree-demic meant that a lot of trees are under threat from pests and diseases, I'm not entirely sure, but I suppose it could go either way, really. But in seriousness, it was very much pointing out the problems of these pests and diseases. So it's definitely creeping into the public consciousness. So it's all very well having graphs like this, but you know, what do they actually mean? And I come back to the Phytophthora ramorum, which I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. And in the UK, the first time that Phytophthora ramorum was identified was in February 2002, and that was at a garden centre in East Sussex. And I underline the word polyphagous because this is a really important term, and that is that this pathogen has a very broad host range. It's got 150 species, and probably more than that, but that's what you know, the evidence suggests at the moment. And as I say, it was introduced in Sussex, and over the last 20-year period, it's moved all the way up the west coast of the country. And there's been considerable amount of money put into trying to stop the spread. And you can see, you know, it obviously has big impacts on the forest ecosystem. On the left-hand side is a picture in the UK, in Scotland, and on the right-hand side, a similar problem with Phytophthora ramorum in California. We'll come on to that a wee bit later in the presentation. So what are the implications for the horticulture sector? Well, the most common way for plant pests to be introduced into a new area is through the movement of live plants. So that's actually been assessed to be the case. On the UK Plant Health Risk Register, there's now over 1,230 plant pests, many of which are notifiable. So they're notifiable pests of food crops, ornamentals, trees. In 2020, the imports into the UK, 89.8% of the trade value of all plants and commodities of the imports what was, is a considerable amount of plant material that we actually rely on from other countries. I suppose third countries now that we've left the European Union. And the evidence indicates that it's not just international supply chains that is the problem. It's also been demonstrated that plant pests spread within the UK horticulture as well, so within national supply chains. And that was evidenced by a piece of work that was done by Forest Research, which is the government forest research agency over here in GB. And they estimated, they did a study and they found that approximately 50% of the samples, the soil samples or grown medium samples collected from 118 nurseries were positive for Phytophthora or closely related oomycetes, including quarantine pest species not previously reported in the UK. So when they actually proactively went out and searched for some of these pests and pathogens, they found a lot more than they actually expected. And they concluded as part of this study that there was a genuine lack of awareness of the risks of Phytophthora contamination and spread within the sector. I recommend having a look at that. There's some good information on that website. It's called Phytothreat. So it's not very well having these sort of hockey stick shaped graphs, which seem to be fairly indicative of wicked problems, be they pest diseases or climate change. But what does it actually look like in practice? Well, this is where I live. I'm based in Oxford. This is I don't live in this house, I wish I did, but this is the front of Oxford Botanic Gardens. And I'm not suggesting that these plants, of course, are infected by, or these specific plants are infected by the pests and diseases that I'm going to cover, but it's just to indicate the range of plants that that could potentially be impacted by the pests and diseases that we've just covered. So pine, Dothrostroma needle blight came in 97. Beech, different species of Phytophthora came in 2003, so that's Canovii. Box caterpillar came in 2007. Obviously, box has blight as well. Photinia, Phytophthora ramorum, which you've already touched upon. Now, there's some pests and diseases that aren't present. So one particular pathogen is rose rosette virus, which is a notifiable pest not yet detected in the UK. Hopefully it will remain that way. And also another worryingly polyphagous bacterial pathogen called Xylella Fastidiosa, again, not present currently in the UK. Xylella Fastidiosa, as I say, is one of these polyphagous pathogens, and it was described as the European Commission as one of the most dangerous plant bacteria worldwide, with huge economic impact for agriculture, public gardens, and the environment. And at the last count, and it was a couple of years ago now, it was 595 species of plants currently known to be susceptible to Xylella. You can see, you may have heard of it in the news, and I think it's particularly impactful in Southern Europe. And you can see here an olive grove that's currently been devastated by the pathogen. So, there were trees in Majorca, the Balearic Islands, Corsica, and southern Italy that hundreds of years old that are being wiped out in just a couple of years. So again, a really worrying example of how devastating some of these pests and diseases can be. Now, if you want to find out some information on Xylella, I suggest a simple YouTube search. Xylella Helen Mirren should bring up this short video. It's about 4 minutes long, and it basically just gives a wee bit of an overview of the biology of the pathogen and what the potential impact is in terms of how many species that it infects and what the implications would be for the horticulture industry should it arrive here in the UK. I believe that demarcated zone is now 2.5 kilometers, not 5 kilometers. based on latest science and also the most recent phytosanitary measures that DEFRA have put in place. So, in summary, what's the issue we're dealing with? Well, we're trying to stop high-risk infected plant material moving through the supply chain, so from stock plants all the way through to the wider landscape. And that's really the problem that we're trying to deal with here. So what are we doing about it? Well, in 2018, after a high growth conference convened by Prince Charles, a number of organizations got together and they formed a Plant Health Alliance. And rather than be just a talk shop, what they wanted to do was do something proactive. So they decided upon setting up a certification scheme for plant health. And indeed, they became the governing body for the Plant Healthy Certification Scheme, which is really what I'm going to talk about from here on in the presentation. So at the heart of any certification scheme is a technical document, a standard. We call it the Plant Health Management Standard. It's essentially 23 requirements that have been written, which are a set of stacked requirements that together hopefully really give a good, robust protection for a site in terms of plant biosecurity. They have two important concepts that have been integrated into this standard, and that's the International Plant Protection Convention's Pesterisk Analysis, which we've sort of changed slightly to be focused on a site rather than one individual pest, and also the World Trade Organization's appropriate level of protection. And what that's, those two together are really aimed at reducing risk. So it's not about eliminating risk, it's reducing the risk of pest introductions down to an appropriate level or an acceptable level. It's mainly a voluntary system, but it's based on regulation. And what we try to do is co-design with regulation so that we have a seamless journey from the more sort of regulatory side of plant health, so phytosanitary certificates, special measures, etc., all the way through to voluntary measures such as the site pest risk analysis. And what we call the voluntary side of it is a systems or proactive approach where we're actually saying, well, we're going to empower ourselves to put a series of measures in place to protect our site, our customers, and ultimately the wider landscape. So we set up the Plant Health Management Standard. You can find it on the homepage of the planthealthy.org.uk website. What we're really trying to do is, as per the strapline, is put biosecurity at the heart of horticulture. We've got it plant healthy so that it's a positive message rather than a negative message, you know, so that we can really encourage people to do something positive to counteract this threat. And ultimately that's it's a mark that we hope will be recognized by the general public in garden centers, at plant shows, botanic gardens, arboreta, etc., which I'll come on to. Whilst developing it, I came across this paper, which is a systems approach for management of pests and pathogens of nurseries. Now, this obviously, I'd hope you'd have a look at the standard and the website, but if there was one take-home point from the presentation this evening, I would go and have a look at this paper and read it. It's very well written. There's many of you probably know in America they have extension services that are associated or attached to universities. And these two academics work for such services, and essentially they have a very good grasp on the practicalities of nursery management, but also the academic side in terms of the research of pests and diseases. And what they essentially did was, as a result of the threat of, the introduction of Phytophthora ramorum arriving in the United States, was set up a a systems approach to plant biosecurity. So some of the key points of that approach and the rationale behind it are that the endpoint inspections by government officials, for example, have only been partially effective, and there's plenty of evidence to demonstrate that, not just in the UK or America, but also in places like New Zealand, who, you know, people tend to hold up as the sort of gold standard. So there is evidence that these endpoint inspections are not perfect. Also, pest management on horticultural or ornamental horticultural businesses, it's not quite as straightforward as agriculture. You know, these sort of monocultural systems. Most nurseries that you visit in the UK, there tends to be many species growing. So whenever you have many species, then obviously the pest host interactions increase, and that requires an awful lot of knowledge in terms of managing said host pest interactions. So ultimately, the staff face a daunting task in responding to pest outbreaks. They've got a lot more to look out for, and a lot more to actually learn about. So at the request of the USDA, a group of plant pathologists got together, I think it was about 2011 in America, and they wrote a minimum standard. And it was based on the principles of HACCP, which is hazard analysis of critical control points. And that was a risk assessment process that came out of the catering industry. And they very eloquently explain how they've applied it to horticulture production systems. And here's a quick overview of the steps that are required for a HACCP. Since then, HACCP, there's been a HACCP certification system set up in Australia that started in 2015, and the systems approach for nursery certification. That this paper was really why the paper was written in the first place, with a view to produce this particular certification system in America. That was launched in 2021. So that was the systems approach for nursery certification. And the reason why I highlight this paper is it's quite coincidental, but also perhaps it's just common sense. It's just really logical that the HACCP process ultimately is not dissimilar to the site pest risk analysis that we developed as part of the plant health management standard. We've got a couple more steps, and ultimately, as I say, what we did was we took the IPPC's pest risk analysis process, which is 3 broad phases, normally applied to a specific pest, and we applied it to a site. So the first phase is initiation. You identify the site that you're dealing with, so the boundaries, what the host plants are that you grow and handle. You identify the host pest interactions, and then you map the pest pathways. So not just the plant movement on and off the site, but also the growing media, the wood pallets, environmental movement of pests and diseases, and indeed water, vehicles, visitors, etc. You then go to the UK Plant Health Risk Register, which is a really useful resource, and you're able to look at the 2 levels of risk: unmitigated and mitigated risk. And ultimately, what one is trying to do is put a set of controls in place to manage the risk down to an appropriate level of protection. And beyond that, there is a continual monitoring process and a process of self-assessment and review, and that's with a view to, as I said, continual improvement. So in summary, we have reactive approaches, which are those sort of endpoint inspections that can only be partially effective, and they might not pick up on asymptomatic plants. So plants that have a disease but don't actually show it, but only show it once it's left your nursery. And ultimately, the systems approach is, as I say, it's a proactive approach, which is ultimately empowering nursery managers and other horticultural businesses in the supply chain to really manage the threat of pests on the plants that they're handling the whole time that they are on their nursery. And as I say, it's a fundamental aspect of a voluntary standard, and ultimately it requires the application of policies, practices, and procedures all year round, or into the day-to-day business operations of a business. So what does that look in practice? Well, it's a number of procedures that you put in place. As I said, monitoring is really key, and that self-assessment and continual improvement is absolutely the heart of the standard. Two categories of pests. The notifiable ones are the ones that we're particularly interested in, and those are the quarantine pests and regulated non-quarantine pests. So those are the ones that we're really trying to either stop being introduced or reduce the spread if they are already here. Of course, there are other pests and diseases that relate to a business, the likes of botrytis cinerea that we've already touched upon. And I would put that more in sort of general plant health. So if there was a line to be drawn between biosecurity and plant health, I would suggest it was there, the difference between notifiable pests and general pests that are essentially ubiquitous within the environment. So what we're really aiming to do is manage that risk from a high level down to an appropriate level. We have guidance for nurseries. We've also produced guidance for garden centers and plant retailers. As far as I'm concerned, from a plant biosecurity perspective, a garden center is very similar to a nursery. In fact, in some cases, it may be more of a threat, because you might be bringing much more plants from multiple sources onto one site, and they might not actually have the same level of husbandry that a nursery would have, i.e. an experienced grower manager on the site. And of course, garden center plants can, they can be in a garden center for many years. So, there is definitely a focus there that's needed. We also have guidance for landscapers, arboriculture, and public gardens. As I say, the standard can be found, or the technical document can be found on the website itself. We've also put some software, which is perhaps a wee bit more user-friendly, on the website, which is the free-to-use self-assessment system. And ultimately, you can answer a set of 20 questions. There's guidance associated with each question. And at the end of it, based on your question, you'll receive a score. You'll be able to download a report, which hopefully should be useful to give you some pointers as to what you can do to meet the plant health management standard requirements. Once you're ready, you're able to apply for an audit. There is a cost with the audit, and you can apply to either one of these two certification bodies, which is Grown in Britain or NSF, and they will provide you with a no obligation quote in terms of sending out an auditor and putting you on the pathway to becoming certified. At the end of that process, once a business becomes certified, they appear on the directory of nurseries. As you can see, it's still a fairly young scheme. Actually, we launched a scheme 2 weeks before the first lockdown, which is rather ironic in terms of biosecurity. So it's been quite a struggle over the last 18 months, but through a sort of combination of site visits and virtual audits, we certainly got up and running. And you can see we've got some nurseries that perhaps you'll be familiar with have already become certified. In fact, Hilliers nursery just became certified last night, so last week. So they should be in the certified category now. So I suppose the big question is, what do people think about it? What's their experience? Well, um, it's it's quite an involved process. I think once people complete it, they have been the feedback's been really really good. I'm quite a practical person, as you can probably tell. I've trained as an arborist, and I've run a couple of horticultural businesses and garden centres. And ultimately, the only thing I'm really interested in is putting a useful tool to really help people protect their sites. The fact that it's a certification scheme as well is, you know, that's all well and good, but ultimately, what we're looking for is something that's effective as well as some sort of assurance process. In terms of the feedback, it's, again, as I said, it's been broadly good. People think it's good for their reputation. It fits well with other schemes such as ISO 14001. In fact, it fits very nicely with ISO 14001. Some people believe that it's a benefit to the sort of organizational culture. It really helps empower staff. Some people have thought that it will lead to productivity gains, so that increased monitoring. And that's something that came out of Australia, actually. Their scheme's slightly more mature. And one nursery over there did quite a careful sort of assessment, and they thought that they'd improved their productivity by 5%. Improved recording systems, obviously reduced impact on the environment. With that monitoring, they could be much more sort of targeted with the pesticide applications, and ultimately the anticipated market opportunity of having being able to produce plants from a certified business. So that's something that the customers are looking to see. And I've got at the bottom here, it says we'd like to see further tangible evidence from the scheme, e.g. gained recognition. I think that seems to be the direction of travel in terms of government procurement policy. There's certainly been noises or comments made by DEFRA that's the way things are going. And I think in March, April of this year, or of next year, there will be an announcement along those lines. So that's a space to watch. And I should say we work very closely with DEFRA because it's that whole process of co-design that I talked about earlier on, which is so important. Oh, excuse me one moment. I've just got a dog in the room. I do apologize. I was boring the dog, it turns out. So back in business again. Apologies for that. I hope you can edit that bit out, Connor, when you put it on YouTube. That would be appreciated. It's always good to have a furry friend interject. But yeah, so anyway, in summary, the pest is bigger than we probably think or been aware of. And ultimately, what we're looking to do is create a positive message that businesses can really get behind and help protect our wider environment. So start to address some of the threats that I talked about earlier on. So yeah, what are we really looking to do is yeah, the end game is really to get the message right down to the public, so that when people are buying plants in garden centers, that they can do something positive to counteract these threats. So we're encouraging everyone to protect gardens, parks, countryside from these pest threats. The Plant Health Alliance is a not-for-profit initiative, and as I say, we try to work with other schemes such as ISO 14001 and the Ornamental Horticulture Assurance Standards, or OHAS, that some of you may be familiar with. We also work with the Woodland Truster on the steering group as well, so we try to work closely with UKISG. And I'd like to think that plant health, as I say, it's more than just a certification scheme. It's something that we've developed. It actually came from growers. It was one of these sort of unique, unusual scenarios where both growers wanted something and government wanted something. So there's been a sort of virtuous coming together, really. But ultimately, it came from growers who were really looking to address this issue and come up with some sort of proactive approach that they could really demonstrate site protection and the protection of their customers, etc. So I'd like to think that it's a real community initiative rather than a couple of people who may not have too much experience of growing, setting up a certification system and going out auditing. I'd like to think that it's the growing community are really behind it, or certainly I would say that the pioneer nurseries in this country have been really good to work with, and it's been very encouraging. Yeah, so I'd say it's if you were to sum it up, it could be considered as a sort of community inspired environmental social governance mark, where we're all really trying to work together to deal with the threat that I've outlined. So here's Nicholson's nursery receiving their certificate. As you can see, it was quite a convivial occasion, but I think people were genuinely proud in that business to have received it. In terms of social media, yeah, you can follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter. You can see is that Be Plant Healthy for Twitter, and LinkedIn's fairly self-explanatory. And other than that, I'd like to say thank you, and yeah, I'd welcome any questions, and apologies for the dog again.
Thank you very much for that, Alistair. That was very interesting and very informative presentation on plant biosecurity and the plant healthy certification scheme. There's a few questions that have come in. One of the questions is there any prior requirements or thoughts that a nursery or a garden centre should consider before making an application to be part of the plant healthy scheme? Or
yeah, I'd do the self-assessment. I'd go onto the website. It's free to use. You can create you just need to create an account, and that takes a few minutes. But the self-assessment's really designed to just get people au fait with the standard. And it may, for some businesses, it can take a good number of months, if not longer, really, just to start getting the head around it, and getting audit ready, really. So the other thing is that one of the certification bodies offers pre-audit services, so you can get an auditor onto your site, and they'll essentially help you get audit ready, and then another auditor will come along and actually do the audit when you are ready.
yeah, do you have a kind of a rough idea how much an audit generally costs for this? Or
yeah, I mean, I can I'll try and give a it's on a sliding scale. It's based on turnover. It's not cheap. Well, I don't know what, I mean, I'm Scottish, so nothing's cheap, you know what I mean? But because there's the admin side of things and the membership fees. But I would say for a business with a turnover of about under £500,000, it would probably be in the region of about £1,000 or so. We hope that it's going to get cheaper as the auditing becomes slicker, because it's a new scheme. You sort of got to bed it in, and the auditors have got to, of course, get skilled up and trained up. And also, once we get more auditors trained up across the various regions of the UK, really, because one of the variable costs is how far an auditor's actually got to move. But I would say that it seems to be the sort of nurseries of turnovers of over 500,000 up the way that have really been engaging with it so far. We're trying to work to bring the costs down, and one of the things we're looking to do is set up group schemes, which could actually work very well in, if you've got a close-knit community, and that's where you essentially appoint or train up your own internal auditor for a group.
Yeah.
They do the audit, and then the external auditor comes in and does an audit of the quality management system, and then does a site visit based on a square root, a randomized square root. And we're just piloting that at the moment with some community tree nurseries in the UK. I'd say that will probably, the findings from that will probably come out in 4 months or so. But yeah, I mean, I'm very conscious of the costs, and it's something we've got to work upon.
Yeah, yeah. This is a bit of a long-winded question, and it might be more aimed at Graham, but it'd be good to get your comment on it as well. And it kind of
You've
ties
given
into
quite
what you're,
long-winded answers, so I probably deserve a long-winded question.
it kind of ties into what we were just discussing there, and in relation to what Daira uh, fund an NI nursery for 2 or 3 years, including providing individual and group assistance to getting registration and inspection. It would be a good opportunity for Daira and the industry to be able to work together within the 4 years, and say that 80% of NI ornamental nurseries are accredited.
Yeah, I mean, my response is, and I'll try and keep it short, is anything we can do to work sensibly, group scheme type scenarios, or if you're sending an auditor over, making sure that they do 4 or 5 nurseries at once, even if they are independent audits. Any sort of coordination that can be done, the certification bodies and me as the acting scheme manager will do what we can to work as efficiently, effectively as possible.
Yep. And Graham, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, thanks, Connor, and thanks, Alistair, as well. A tremendous presentation. I certainly picked up a very useful overview and some really interesting insights to that. So what I would say in response to the question, I think it sort of comes on the back of a query that you shared with me, Connor, about annual fees associated with registration in DAERA. Well, the good news is that at the moment, because it's a statutory requirement to become a professional operator recognized, or a registered authorized professional operator to issue plant passports, there are no fees. The only fees that are applicable to businesses at the minute are associated with phytosanitary certificate issuing. So if you're exporting and you want to request a PC, you do have to pay for it. But the inspection phase of that process, as well as all the renewals and maintenance of your registrations, are free of charge at present. Now, I have to say at this point, that may change, because the legislation that we implement the enforcement under does have that provision where there should be levies and fees set against those activities, unless the territory or the administration is unable to recoup the costs by imposing the fees, if that makes sense to people. So that, as I understand it, with my policy and legislative colleagues, is currently being assessed, and there will be news forthcoming, but probably not in the immediate future. So while you can, if anyone on the call attending tonight knows of businesses that they interact with who they think might need to become a professional operator, they should encourage them to get registered at the minute. In relation to the plant healthy certification approach, because it is an initiative which has a sort of a voluntary element to it, and because it's to do with sort of commercial aspects of competency and developmental, we would very much encourage it. We wouldn't at the moment be able to say we can make provision financially, but that is something I would very much I would ask that the representative industry bodies would put that request forward to government, to the executive, and say, here's an opportunity for horticulture to have some some real tangible support, which would be towards a directed objective and is for everybody's benefit, and it's a very strong argument. So at the moment, I'd have to say, you know, without a case being put forward, there wouldn't be that provision just as a standard tranche of money. But definitely, it has a lot in its favor. So I'd encourage that approach from Growers NI or the Horticultural Trades Association or whoever, you know, the Association of Landscape Contractors, anybody, or collective, as Alistair had said, you know, well, cooperation and collaboration is the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Then just maybe discuss, I know you briefly mentioned in your presentation there, but what is the feeling on the ground that the nurseries that have signed up to the scheme, have they got much success from it, and has it increased or decreased their workload and the likes of that there? What's their thoughts on it?
I would say it's definitely increased the workload. I think any sort of certification scheme, be it ISO, you know, sort of these general environmental standards or quality management systems like 9001, there's definitely, you've got to put effort into it. I hope that this is more than a tick box exercise, and it's actually, as I say, it's a useful tool, and we're starting to see, as I say, that those messages coming out. But ultimately, I mean, I think I've got some testimonials, which I can probably share with you at some point. I won't try and find them now because it will take me a couple of minutes. But yeah, the likes of Bartram Trees, Nicholson Nurseries, that they're very much behind it. I tell you what it is. We're dealing with a thing called counterfactuals. So you invest some money, you put something in place, and you protect your site against something that may or may not come along. If you see what I mean.
Yeah.
If it does come along, then it's a big problem. But obviously, or it could potentially be a big problem for your nursery in the case of Xylella. But what we're trying to do is, okay, so well, the counterfactual thing's fine, but we want to put a tool in place that also improves quality, improves recording systems. It just gives people better confidence of what they're dealing with. Ultimately, the notifiable pest, that pest risk analysis, which is quite a thorough undertaking, is actually a requirement now of issuing plant passports. I don't know how, to what extent it's being, for want of a better word, enforced in Northern Ireland, but I'd still say it's not being really, you know, nurseries aren't really being held to it over here in this country. Sorry, in England and Scotland and Wales, or certainly in England. But that knowledge, Article 89 of, I think it's the original European Union 2016-2031 legislation, it basically says to issue plant passports, you have to have a knowledge of all notifiable pests that are relevant to your business, how to control them so you stop their spread. So ultimately, I'd like to think that the plant health management standard is really breaking ice on enabling businesses to really get a comprehensive handle on exactly that set of information.
Yeah, yeah. And then I guess one final question is, what does the future look for at plant biosecurity and the plant healthy scheme? What is your thoughts on that? Where would you like it to go, and what would you like to achieve from this?
Well, that's a really good question. The only reason I'm in it, I've got a nice apple tree outside my we're lucky to have it's probably about an 80-year-old apple tree in a small garden in not the most salubrious part of Oxford, but the only thing I'm looking for is to try and have some sort of assurance to myself personally that we're doing the best we can as a horticultural sector to you know, grow the wonderful variety of plants that the horticulture sector provides us, and protect them. So that's my end game, is really to just try and, stop these pests and diseases, largely through no fault of their own, coming into our country and causing damage. I think the plant health management standard is a really useful approach, and it seems to be being applied in a number of regions around the world to good effect. I hope the certification scheme can deliver that. And maybe it will be something that lasts for the long term, for 15, 20, 30 years or beyond. Or maybe something where it works for 5, 10 years. I don't know. But as long as it delivers that level of protection for our country, and of course the countries that we trade with as well, that's all that I'm really looking for,
Yeah, that's great. Don't think there's any other questions have come in, so we can wrap up with that, I guess. Thanks again, Alistair, for joining us tonight and presenting a very informative and interesting presentation on plant biosecurity and the plant healthy certification scheme. And if any question comes in, I will send them on to you as well. Hopefully we can get something working and some collaboration, as Graham mentioned there. And thanks, Graham, for listening in as well and answering those questions as well that came in. Much appreciated as well.
Pleasure. Connor, could I just ask, please, this session is being recorded. Is it something that can be made public available? I think Alistair mentioned YouTube.
Yeah, we'll put it up on the CAFRE YouTube channel and be able to share it with the attendees and anybody that missed out as well.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I'll send you on a recording of it as well, so you can send it off to your colleagues.
Yes, I can think of 2 or 3 people who'd be really very interested to know where things stand at the moment, and also, as you've mentioned there, if there's the potential with one thing that I do attend is what's called the Plant Health Operational Readiness subgroup, and they're doing a training package which I think is integrating and working in collaboration with the plant healthy certification, with different units and modules. So there's a lot of attention being given to this topic, so it's very timely.
That's great.
Well, yeah, Graham, that's actually a great point. I completely forgot to mention is that there's 5 freely available training modules on the Plant Healthy website, and you get a certificate at the end of it on passing a wee exam. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I mean, ultimately, I think you get where we're coming from. Really, it's just trying to work collaboratively with a broad church of organisations to help improve the situation, really. So we'd be absolutely delighted to work with Northern Ireland in any way we can. And if you want, in terms of editing out the bit where the dog came into the room, I've got editing software, so just let me know, Connor.
I'll do my best. But yeah,
thank you very much. I really appreciate you asking me to speak, and thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll put in a link into the email that I'll send out to everybody for those modules so people can access them so they know where they are.
Grand.
Yep. So that's great. So we'll wrap it up with that, and we'll see you all again very shortly. And thanks again for everybody for attending. And I hope you've got something out of this webinar and enjoyed it. Thank you.
All the best, everyone. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.